So I'd like to welcome Dr. Brooke Goldner to the Together We Can project and Fever Radio here in Leeds, West Yorkshire. Just as a short introduction, Dr. Goldner is a board-certified medical doctor and the author of 3 best-selling books, Goodbye Lupus, Goodbye Autoimmune Disease, and Green Smoothie Recipes to Kickstart Your Health and Healing. Featured on the front of Vegan Health and Fitness magazine 3 times, including the recent cover of Fit Over 40, she has graduated from Carnegie Mellon University with honors for genetic research in leukemia and neurobiology, and was a graduate of the Temple University School of Medicine, chief resident at UCLA Harbor Residency, and holds a certificate in plant-based nutrition from Cornell University. She's the founder of GoodbyeLupus.com and creator of the Hyper-Nourishing Protocol for Autoimmune Reversal. And her website is www.goodbyelupus.com. Welcome to Fever Radio, Dr. Goldner.
Thank you so much.
And I should also say, in my mind, you're obviously famous worldwide for these things, but you're most famous for creating a kind of smoothie solution. I remember that word from back in the day, but smoothie solution for addressing lupus, which is a condition that you suffered with. I understand you treat many patients with lupus today with a nutrition diet-based principle. And so we'd like to know more. And it's not just lupus that you're treating. I understand it's many inflammatory conditions that you're able to treat with this protocol. But first of all, if we can just begin by asking you, what is lupus?
So lupus is an autoimmune disease. Basically, it's a disease where your immune system, which is the part of your immune system that's supposed to attack invaders like bacteria, viruses, instead starts attacking your own tissues. So any autoimmune disease works this way. Rheumatoid arthritis, it's primarily the joints. Multiple sclerosis, it's the nervous system. Scleroderma, it's the skin. Sjogren's, it's your glands. Lupus, it could be anywhere. Lupus is a very dangerous autoimmune disease because it can attack any organ and often progresses from one to another. So while a lot of people tend to have kidney problems with it, which is what I had, I also had strokes from it, many strokes from it. You can have heart failure, lung problems, brain inflammation. It's a very scary illness that tends to affect people, especially women. It usually starts at ages where hormones get involved, like teen years, pregnancy, or menopause. But it's a very aggressive and scary illness for many, many people. And it's when I was diagnosed with at 16.
Okay, well, and is there a spectrum with lupus diagnoses? Do some people get a better version of it, and some people get
a better version? Absolutely. So so when it comes to lupus, there are some people who have primarily a skin version of it, where they get lesions in their skin, but their other organs are safe. Other people might have just primarily arthritis, for example. Many of us start with one and progress. Like I know for myself, I started out with migraine headaches, and then I started getting joint pain and arthritis, and then I got rashes. And then by the time I was diagnosed, I went to the hospital because of rashes and a migraine, and I was told I was in stage 4 kidney failure because the lupus was attacking my kidneys. So I'm 46 now. 30 years ago, when I was diagnosed, I was 16, they told me I had at best 6 months to live if they didn't do aggressive treatments to try to save my kidney. So I ended up doing experimental treatments, which nobody wants to do, right? In order to save my life, and it involved chemotherapy and high dose steroids and just aggressively trying to shut my immune system off to try to save my kidneys. And obviously I'm here, so it worked, but it was excruciating. And it doesn't always work. That's the thing about the treatments now is, here we are 30 years later, we've got many different types of pills, lots of, millions of dollars going into different studies to look at more pills. And yet people are still suffering from it. I mean, Selena Gomez got the chemotherapy that was tested on me, and she still needed a kidney transplant. So there's a lot of different factors that affect people and how severe they are. Not everyone responds to the same medicines. There's a lot in it. So yes, some people get off a bit luckier where they have more mild symptoms. Others can end up in organ failure. I had a young lady, I helped reverse her disease completely. She was 11 years old, and she had lupus in her kidneys, her heart, and her lungs all at the same time. And she actually was a code blue. She died. They brought her back. And that's when her parents found me. And within 2 weeks of doing the Goodbye Lupus protocol, my nutrition plan, within 2 weeks, her kidneys were back to normal. Then within the next couple months, her heart was back to normal. And she's now in high school, has never had a relapse, doesn't require medications, and has been able to stay healthy by changing the way she eats, where she literally was being killed by the disease. So it can be very scary. And even if you start out with mild symptoms, it's considered a progressive disease, which means over time, most likely you're going to get sicker. And that's true with all the autoimmune diseases. People often start with one, like Hashimoto's, affecting their thyroid. And even years or decades later, they end up with psoriasis or Sjogren's or lupus. So it's definitely not a diagnosis that anybody wants. But thankfully, what I've learned is there's a lot of hope to get your health back.
Okay, I mean, so just going back to when you were first diagnosed, and you said that you had the treatments, and well, they worked because you're here today, right? So why didn't you continue with? I mean, most people, would continue with the standard kind of medical approach. What led you to developing this hypernourishing protocol?
Pure chance. So I actually did continue with medical treatments. And in spite of that, even when my kidneys were in remission, you have to understand too, that remission when it comes to autoimmune disease does not mean that you're healed in any way. It just means you're not currently dying from the disease. So after 2 years of chemotherapy and high dose steroids, I was considered in my first remission, but I still had protein in my urine because of the chronic kidney issues, which I was told I would have that for life because of the damage to my kidneys. I still had arthritis that I had to take medicine for. I still had migraines that I had to take medicine for. So even in remission on medical treatment, yes, they saved me in terms of my kidneys were no longer failing, but yet I was still sick and I still had pain. I still was very much aware that I had an illness. And even with medical treatment, I got sick again in medical school. One of the things we tell people when they have autoimmune disease is always get enough sleep, avoid stress. So I went to medical school, which is not really conducive to that. Nobody cares what illness you're diagnosed with. You have to be on call. And back then in the States, now in the States, we have some laws around how many hours you can work, residents and medical students. But back in the day when I was a med student, we didn't have those laws in place yet. And I would work sometimes 100-hour weeks as a medical student, getting up early, pre-rounding, staying late, passing out on my couch in my scrubs, waking up, it's time to go back. So it was really exhausting. And so I actually had a relapse, or a flare really, where it wasn't my kidneys this time, but now I was making new antibodies that was causing blood clots. So I was getting double vision. I had mini strokes, and then I had to start taking injectable blood thinners. And at this point they said, again, for life, you will need to take these blood thinners or you could have a major stroke or pulmonary embolism and die. But don't hit your head because you're on blood thinners and you could have a bleed in your head and die. So, and at this point I was already a medical student. So I really understood my disease and was a lot more scared of it than I was when I was younger. When I was younger, there was no internet. My kids say when I was a kid, it was the dark ages because there was no Wi-Fi, but really it was a time where you had to go to the library to learn things, right? So my mom got me one book when I was 16 and I started reading and it was just depressing. I put it aside and I decided, nope, I'm not going to let anybody tell me what my story is going to be. I'll just find out. I'm just going to plan on living. I'm going to plan on surviving it and see what happens. But as a med student, I knew very clearly what I had. I've been studying it, I knew exactly. And it was very scary for me to go through, especially the blood clots, because listen, I'm not an athlete. Even on the dance floor, I once gave somebody a bloody lip from flailing my arms around, like there was no other career for me besides being a nerd. And the idea that I could have a stroke and lose all of that was terrifying. So, that was really what my life was I was very focused on passion and purpose and living every moment as much as I could because I didn't have how many moments I would have. In fact, I was still beating the odds at that point. But medicines were what kept me going. So it wasn't like I just decided, oh, let me stop taking medicines and see if kale will help. I would have thought that was the most ridiculous and dangerous idea I'd ever heard of. It was really just an accident. When I met my husband, Thomas Tadlock, we met 2 months before I finished up at med school, and I was leaving from Pittsburgh to go to California to start my residency. And we just fell in love. And we were talking about marriage within a month of meeting. It was magical, still is. But it was magical. And we both knew that's what we wanted. And I had to explain to him, that I had this disease, that I can't have your children, that if I got pregnant, I could die from a blood clot. I probably would miscarry. If I did have a baby, they could have lupus attacking their organs. They can, be born with heart blocks. So I can't have your children. I'm going to become disabled at some point. I'm not going to live as long as you. You're going to end up taking care of me when I'm disabled. It's not really a romantic discussion to have when someone's talking about marrying you, but that was the reality I needed him to understand. And he was on board. Like, he just said, I'd rather live a short life with you than a lifetime with anybody else. And I want to get married. And I went, yes, good. Like, I have no problem letting people love me. I just wanted him to really know what he was getting into. And, side story, his best friend he ever had before me died of cancer when they were in their 20s. And so I still think about the courage it took him to open his heart up again, or finally he found another soulmate, because his best friend was a soulmate too. And then, be told they could be taken away. But, we went all in, and my husband is a scientist as well. And his passion was understanding how to create a fast metabolism in the fitness world. So he was a computer science guy who wanted to apply computer science and mathematics to cellular biology, because as soon as he tried to go for his master's in the exercise science world, all science seemed to break down. When in mathematics and computer science, it was, if you have the right algorithm, you get the right output, right? That is, you have to, and you'll get the right output every time. And then he went for exercise science. He goes, what is the optimum diet for fat loss? And they didn't know, PhDs. Well, maybe high fat, low fat, high carb, high protein, low carb. Maybe everybody's different. And it was making him very frustrated, because every other species on the planet, humans seem to know what they're supposed to eat, right? We know what koala bears eat. We know what cats should eat. We know what dogs should eat. We know what giraffes should eat. We know what all these other animals should eat. And then when it comes to our own species, we don't know, right? We have opinions now instead of science. So that was his obsession. And so he was having amazing results. He became the #1 rapid fat loss expert, really looking at how nutrition affects people's ability to lose fat, gain muscle, et cetera. So since we were getting married and we were going to elope to Hawaii, I wanted to look like the people he was training for MTV who had six packs, I swear he had abs from his teeth all the way down, right? Like, it was like, I wanted to look like that. Why not? So I asked him to put me on one of his programs. He had to change his program for me because it was early on in the evolution of it. And so while many things were the same, like using cruciferous vegetables for the highest dose of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and omega-3 fatty acids, water intake, those were things that were already there. He at the time still was promoting people using some kind of animal products for protein, usually meat, like free range. It was kind of like what paleo became. And it works for fat loss and everything, it does. So, but I was already a vegetarian. I didn't eat meat. I ate lots of dairy, lots of eggs, but I didn't eat meat. So he had to adjust his program. He told me all the meat, all the eggs and cheese was just saturated fat that was going to slow down my fat loss. So they had to go. And then I ate everything else the same. And so what happened is I accidentally became a high raw vegan, but very nourishing one, and so it was an accident. And what happened was within 3 months, I went from a size 11 to a size 3. I was totally ripped. And for the first time, I was now 28 years old. I was diagnosed with lupus at 16. And I had blood tests every month showing the activity of my disease because my doctors were very afraid of me. They monitored me. And for the first time in the 12 years I was sick, not only did I lose the weight, but I also had no symptoms of disease. I had no migraines. I had no joint pain. I had tons of energy, to the point that my chairman of my program pulled me aside because he was worried about me. All the other residents were appropriately depressed and exhausted, and I was bubbly and happy. And he was just, checking in that I wasn't manic or something. I'm like, no, I'm just happy to be here. This is my dream. I'm a doctor. I love this. And all right. And I ended up their first solo chief resident because they used my energy to do the job of 2 people. But yeah, and then when I went to get my lab test drawn, they were negative for lupus for the first time in 12 years. Okay. And what I can tell you is it is now 17 years since I was first negative for lupus, and I've continued to be negative for lupus, and I've had 0 relapses. I have perfectly normal labs. In fact, my labs are better than anyone else my age, and better than most people 20 years younger. I've never had a relapse of any kind. I've had 2 beautiful sons who are healthy, vibrant, high-achieving kids. And so what we did is it changed the course of our lives. We decided that we don't just get to live happily ever after and keep it to ourselves, but we started to study it and understand it to see what exactly happened, especially after I had my first son with no relapse, which I shouldn't have been able to do, right? And so that's what really led to that, to our, to our.
If I just interrupt there for a second. So, your husband is on a kind of a paleo type of principle diet.
At the time.
At the time, right? And you, so I guess for paleo people, dairy is a big no-no, isn't it? And
right. No dairy, no processed foods. There's a lot of variation on them. This was before paleo was a thing. Right. We're old, but he saw all the benefit of the vegetables. But according to what everyone was telling him, you need meat for protein, right? Okay. So he was trying to find the least inflammatory form of meat, and he said, okay, free range. What he's later discovered is meat's absolutely not necessary, and he's been able to show that you can build, he can build muscle much more quickly on half the protein using plants than he ever could with meat.
It's interesting.
So it's really cool. Yeah.
So he's basically come with these paleo kind of ideas. You're getting married, you're trying to get shredded like him. He's adapted the diet for a vegetarian.
Yep.
You've then gone on this diet, you start to get better. And I guess now your diet has become the standard diet that you both consume. Would that be correct? So that's what led
right.
to
well, we started testing it. First, we tried to understand it scientifically. What is exactly going on? What is the impact of these different kinds of nutrients on cellular function, on the immune system? Because that's really not talked about. And what we discovered is we'd accidentally created the most anti-inflammatory way of eating possible in terms of bringing down inflammation, increasing anti-inflammatory immune function, and optimizing someone's ability to repair damage to their cells. So what we realized is metabolism is not just about how quickly you can lose fat or gain muscle, but how quickly and effectively your cells work. And that will include repairing damage and reversing disease. And then even once we thought we had it, we tested it for free on people to try to see if we could get the same results. And only when we got 100% of the people who were doing that getting results did we even bring it to the public, because we didn't want to do what a lot of folks do, which is they'll say, I did this and got better. I don't know why. I don't know if I got better because of everything or in spite of some things, but just do what I did. And then what tends to happen is some people get better, some people get worse. So that's one of the problems with paleo and other things, other diets where, people are getting better and they assume it's because of everything they're doing, where sometimes it's in spite of some of the things they did, right? So we wanted to be really as ethical as we could and help people as much as possible. I always say I want to save your life, and my husband says I want to save your wife, but we really want to make sure that everything we're teaching is based off of results and not based off of theories or ideas. We need it to work consistently. And so that's what we did. And when we brought it to the public, we decided to also give it away for free, just so people would know it. And so folks who know me already, they know that I'm online constantly teaching for free. Every Wednesday, I'm live on my social medias at Goodbye Lupus, teaching for free, doing free Q&As to the public, trying to help people learn this and take action so they can get their health back.
Okay. So 100% of people, you're saying that 100% of people who follow the hypernourishing protocol reverse their lupus, any other conditions?
Well, they can reverse the disease process.
Yeah.
And get themselves healthier. 100% of people do it will get healthier. There's no way to hypernourish, which is what we call the overdose of nutrition we give people, and not have benefits for your health. And that's true across the board. So we have people now who do our programs with us who come to us with many different diseases, all the different autoimmune, diabetes, all sorts of different, chronic fatigue, all sorts of problems, and they get better. We had people reverse glaucoma, tumors that shrank. I mean, it's really, really amazing. I'm constantly in goosebumps because the protocol is not specific for disease. It's specific for cellular repair. Now, that's not to say that everybody will become symptom-free, because it's not necessarily the case. I mean, if you've been sick for a very long time, there's going to be damage, right? So I was lucky that my kidneys actually went back to normal even after 12 years of protein in my urine. That went away and has stayed away. But there's a lot of people now, like I've published reversing end-stage kidney failure, getting people off the transplant list. Those folks don't go from full failure to normal kidneys. We get them as high as they can get so that they don't need transplant, but they're usually, lucky to get 15, 20% kidney function that they can live on, but I don't expect to see 100. There's people who have Sjogren's disease who reverse the disease and they're healthy, but they still have some dryness in their eyes from damage to their glands, or people with Hashimoto's for 30 years, their antibodies are gone now, but they still need some thyroid hormone because of the damage done. So I'm not saying that every symptom of everything goes away 100% of the time, but I'm saying that if you apply this protocol, you are guaranteed to improve your health. And for many people, for most people, they will get full remission. And that's what's been extraordinary. And it's still exciting every single day.
So do you see then the protocol that you're applying to be the gold standard approach for treating kidney disease, lupus, and other diseases? Would you be? I
would like it to be, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to kidney failure, everything that we're doing really makes sense, especially in the context of all of the research that's established. So I've had doctors reach out to me who have been just amazed with how you can reverse kidney failure. Unfortunately, not the nephrologists, they don't want to listen, but that I've had many doctors reach out and say, this is impossible and it's incredible. And they're excited by it. So have hope for doctors. But when you look at kidney failure or kidney function, they have shown, I mean, the research is there, not just for strange fringe doctors like myself, but in mainstream nephrology, they teach that animal protein is stressful for the kidney, and it puts it into hyperfiltration, which can immediately cause damage, decrease the GFR, which is the filtration rate, and increase the creatine levels. And so you can see the damage directly after a meal that's high in animal protein. And so when the research was done, unfortunately, rather than the recommendations saying, don't eat any meat or dairy or eggs because it'll hurt your kidneys, they instead adopted a more neutral and less jarring way of teaching that won't make industries mad, which is eat a low protein diet if you have kidney problems, which nobody knows what that means. What is low protein and what are you supposed to eat and how much? And then if your blood protein levels go down because you're losing it from your kidney, they'll tell you to eat an egg, which then damages the kidney more and causes you to lose more, right? So they don't even know. And by the way, when they did repeat the research looking at high protein plant foods like tofu and soy, it did not damage the kidneys. So it's not protein, it's animal products. So when you look at the fact that the kidneys are directly damaged by people eating animal products, and this is not just true for kidney failure patients. I regularly see people who are in their 60s to 90s. I have a 100-year-old who came to me. He was fun, but those folks usually have a reduction in their filtration rate. So usually your filtration rate, I was told in medical school, gets worse over time as you age. So you start out at maybe 100, 120, and then it'll keep going down, but it's not considered failure until it gets below 60. Well, I see people all the time who come to me with a filtration rate of 65 to 85, and they're not there for their kidneys. They're there for their joint pain. They're there for their cholesterol or their blood sugar. And yet within a month, their kidney functions up to 95, 100. So what I've seen is it's not just damage of age over time, but the impact of malnourishment and toxic eating over time. And even when people are older, it's reversible.
Interesting. I mean, it's got to be said in the South Asian community here in the UK, at the very least, we're identified as having far higher rates of cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, diabetes. Actually, it seems like every disease we seem to affect the South Asians even more. I don't know if that's a racist thing or not, but it's another story. It's of real importance that we can get a little bit of a handle on what we can do for our kidneys. And also it seems that South Asians, just by nature of our genes, have a lower EGFR starting point than Caucasians or the wider community here in the UK. We've reached the end of part one, Dr. Goldner. I'd like to hold you just for a minute, and when we come back into part two, I'd really like to get into what your hypernourishing protocol entails and how I might be able to help some of our listeners.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And we're back with Dr. Brooke Goldner, who's talking to us about her hypernourishing protocol, which has been used to great success for patients who are suffering with lupus, one of which was Dr. Goldner herself. And also, we've just been talking about kidney disease as well and the benefits of the protocol for, I don't know if regenerating the kidneys is the right term, but certainly increasing kidney function through use of the protocol, which is essentially involves a dietary change. So, Dr. Goldner, can you give us some detail as to what does the hyper-nourishing protocol involve? I know it previously as a smoothie solution, is it just smoothies, or is it more than that?
It's more than that. I would like to add, though, to the kidney discussion is that the kidneys are like our other organs. People often have heard that the liver can regenerate, right? Well, so can the kidneys, so can the lungs, so can the eyes. And I've learned this through results over time. So while the kidneys were the first thing I've seen repair and regenerate and improve in function, if you want to call it regenerate, right? They're repairing. There's inflammation making them sick and they repair. We've seen it in other organs. I recently had a man in his 70s do my rapid recovery program where he was on the lung transplant list for autoimmune disease killing his lungs. And on week 5, he was kicked off the lung transplant list because his lungs were better, right? I had a 77-year-old man reverse glaucoma. By week 5, his glaucoma was gone. So it's been one of the most exciting and extraordinary things for me, especially as a scientist, as a doctor, to see what's possible, because, I was trained that all of these things were this is just what you have forever, including what I had. So it's not just the kidneys, but our body is literally designed to repair itself if it has the tools. I always say it's like a Lego set. You have the instructions. Well, our DNA has the instructions, but then you need the pieces. And if you don't have the yellow piece and you try to use the blue piece instead, you're going to not have the right building, as my crying kids have told me before when I tried to substitute out parts that were not the right ones, right? So it's both extraordinary and it makes sense that is how we function, is that we do have the ability to repair damage, but we have to do 2 things. We have to stop damaging ourselves, and we have to give our body the ingredients to repair it. So hypernourishment is what we call the intentional overdose in the nutrients your body uses to repair damage and to optimize cellular function and immune functions. That's all it is. We're providing the ingredients. Your body uses those ingredients to then perform what it already knows how to do, but just has been too malnourished to be able to do all this time. So hypernourishment is really about what you're adding. And you're right, the smoothie solution is one that we created to make it more palatable for people to do hypernourishment. So when we first started with this, I was just eating pounds of raw vegetables every day. So, I would buy like a couple pounds of broccoli and cauliflower and a big thing of guacamole. And all day I would just shove that into my mouth. And then I would just drink oil for omega-3. And it was purely about function. And listen, I'm really good at just do whatever it takes. So as much as I was a foodie at some point, I can also switch into let's get it done mode, and so that's what I did. But for a lot of folks, that's really difficult. For many folks with autoimmune disease, food is the only thing that they have that entertains them anymore. They are home, they're disabled, they're in pain, they don't have things to look forward to. And so the idea of sitting in front of a plate of raw vegetables, it's just very hard for them to imagine. And I do a lot of work with people on the emotional side, because the diet's actually really simple. It's getting them to do it that's hard. And so I have a lot of expertise in working with people on motivation. I'm a trauma specialist, and I help people with the emotional side so that they can just take action. But it can be a very difficult thing. So what we found is if we shove it all into a blender and put a straw in it and it tastes decent, people will drink it. So that's how we came up with a smoothie solution, and it works. There are people who never would have been able to sit and eat that much salad who don't mind literally having a cup with a straw in it that they can drink while they're working or talking or doing things, and they get it down. And that's really what we're trying to do, is find a way to get nutrients into their body.
It's worthwhile saying, I mean, the amount of greens that are involved in your protocol is a very large amount, isn't it? Something, I mean, for us over here, like a pound to 2 pounds or half a kilo to a kilo of greens a day, which practically speaking, I've tried to do this myself. A smoothie is very useful for that, isn't it? A blender is very useful for that.
Yes, and I'm not putting people on a kilo a day. Usually, for hypernourishment, it's really, 454 grams, 16 ounces is the starting point to call it hypernourishment. And we do need that high dose, right? Because if you just add a little bit, yes, you're adding nourishment, but you've got about 100 trillion cells. A small cup of greens is not going to dramatically change your health. Not when you already have momentum towards disease. You have a whole disease process going on. It's like a big boulder rolling around. You're not going to just put one hand up and hope that you can stop it, right? We need a huge amount of force to push back against it, to first stabilize you, and then actually reverse the whole process, right? Push that boulder back. So it is a huge dose. But for most people, they are so deficient. I mean, that's one of the things we looked at when we were first developing the protocol is, why would this have this impact? And my husband made friends with a biochemist who creates supplements. And what his research showed is most people, at least in America, but I know throughout the world, are deficient in minerals. And where do minerals come from? They come from vegetables that are sitting in the soil because the minerals are in the soil. So most people are extremely deficient because they haven't eaten it their whole lives. I mean, in the US, the #1 most consumed vegetable is ketchup. That's so it's something that people have been starving for forever. So hypernourishment is a way to get it all in, and it is aggressive. But 16 ounces or 454 grams a day of cruciferous vegetables like kale, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, or other high nutrient vegetables like spinach, chard, those really will do the job because they have the highest dose of the vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, all those phytonutrients you need. And what's really fascinating is that there's been independent research by Johns Hopkins looking at the power of cruciferous vegetables over the years. And, we have had people with many different diseases, including people trying to recover from cancers, who have done our programs where we do only hypernourishment. They're raw and they're on only hypernourishment, where markers have come down, tumors have receded. It's been quite remarkable. And I'm not saying to do it instead of cancer treatment. I think you do whatever it takes, but this is just results that we've seen. And then you look at Johns Hopkins, and they've done tests showing that cruciferous vegetables kill cancer cells, right? We've also had people get COVID and not be symptomatic, or reverse long COVID. Every person who's joined our group for long COVID has reversed it. And Johns Hopkins showed that too. That cruciferous vegetables actually prevent the COVID virus from replicating by 50%. So the same thing that we've been seeing for 17 years has been able to reverse disease. The scientific community is really catching up on the mechanisms of it as well.
Okay, so just for our listeners, when you're saying cruciferous vegetables, you mean kale, cauliflower, broccoli, sprouts, things of that order?
Well, things that, yeah. So if you look up cruciferous, you're going to find a huge list. But the most common ones people eat are usually kale, broccoli, cauliflower. Those are the most common ones that people eat around the world. But there's a huge list of them.
Okay, so you recommend a portion of cruciferous vegetables, a large portion, I guess, of cruciferous vegetables a day, and then leafy greens in addition to that as well, is it? Or
no, either way. So I call them high nutrient vegetables, which are going to be mainly cruciferous, but also I've seen great results with things like spinach or chard. So we're looking for the vegetables that have the highest dose of nutrition, because if you're going to shove all this in your body, get the most bang for your buck, right? If you shove the same amount of carrots and cucumbers in, you wouldn't get all of the nutrients that you would have gotten from the others, right? People think they're going to eat carrots for beta carotene. You're going to get more from the kale, like eat the kale, right? So that's the reason for that. And then we use omega-3s from flax and chia seeds, and we put that into the blender. People need to be better hydrated in order to stimulate their metabolism and the whole disease reversal process. And most people are dehydrated. So the blender also tends to make people drink more water, because it's 30 to 40 ounces will go in there. And so so the smoothie is really designed to just impart that nutrition in a way that seems practical for people. And it's easy. You blend it up, and then you just, have a cup every few hours throughout the day, and you finish it by the end of the day. And what happens is, one, you start to actually get healthier, and you feel more energized. You have glorious bowel movements. All these things start working for people. They feel good, and it will crowd out some of the junk. You're not going to eat your full burger and fries if you've already had a big cup of smoothie. So it's a great starting point for people who want to get nourished, get healthier, but maybe aren't even ready to make the full commitment to what they need to do for their diet.
Okay. And so this is a smoothie which would be packed full of like a blender, 2-liter blender jug, packed almost full with, let's say, spinach or kale or whatever other greens that you might, particularly fancy. And then you top that off with a bit of fruit and water. Am I correct? And also
flax and chia seeds, either one, for the omega-3s.
For the omega-3s, right?
Yeah.
And then you blend that. And so that would be one meal, would it? And you'd have 3 meals a day? Or
No. That would be, try to finish that by the end of the day.
Right. So that's your day's worth of food, basically, essentially.
It can be. I mean, that's your day's worth of nutrition. If you're trying to hypernourish, if you're trying to get that overdose, then you want to finish that by the end of the day. But, you would then break that into, like I said, you could break that into 4 or 5 cups, and you could start every meal with a cup of smoothie and then eat something else. For some folks, their stomachs are so slow that literally that blender is all they can do until their gut adjusts. But after a few weeks, your gut adjusts and you get hungry. So you can absolutely eat more on top of that. I've seen people do 2 blenders a day. Or I've seen people just add the blender to their current meals and kind of then change their meals over to healthier ones, maybe get rid of meat and dairy and processed foods and start eating more salads, more cooked vegetables, things like that. So how extreme you want to take this really depends on, how sick you are and what your goals are. But yeah, when I'm talking about hypernourishment, I'm really talking about the addition of these foods to your diet, not necessarily eliminating anything else.
All right. So you're saying people, if they're eating, I don't know, meat and potatoes or whatever, they can continue doing that and add this hypernourishment principle into that diet, and that would be fine.
Well, that would be a great start, right? So there's a lot of pushback when you tell somebody you shouldn't eat that and it's their favorite food. There's a lot of pushback. People don't want to listen to you. They just want to stay with what they're addicted to, because it really is addiction. People don't sit there and eat, Doritos and French fries or chips, I'm sure, and big cheeseburgers because they think it's healthy. They're doing it because they're addicted to that high. So if you try to take someone away from their addiction, they usually don't want to listen at all. So hypernourishment to me is the gateway drug of healthy eating, right? We want to introduce people to how good it can feel to get nourished, so that if I say, add this, then they can listen. Okay, fine, I'll add it. And then we can keep talking about the negative aspects of what they're eating and how it's still damaging to them. And as they're feeling more nourished, they'll be more open to it. So it really depends. If someone comes to me in kidney failure, of course, I'm going to say, you can't eat your burger and the smoothie. It's not going to work because every bite of meat is damaging your kidney, right? And we have to save every bit of kidney you can. But for people who are stable and want to improve their health, but their life's not in danger, then adding what they're missing is a really great start, because what they're missing is usually more important to the state of their health than even the other junk they're eating. Because if you're malnourished of these nutrients, you can't repair the damage and you're just getting sicker.
Okay, so let's use my smoothie as an example. Okay. I would commonly, in a 2-liter blender jug, I'll put about, I think, 200 odd grams of spinach in there. It's pretty much packed. I like things sweet, so I put about 18 dates, a bag of strawberries or blueberries, 350 grams, and then add water, and I'd probably add some source of fat, like half an avocado or some nuts or whatever, to create some richness. Would that be in line with your protocol?
No.
Why not? Why not? Is it too much sugar?
Well, so because hypernourishment, we're really looking at delivering the vegetables. So you are eating good food choices, but if you're trying to hypernourish, then you really want to switch your ratio of your fruit to your vegetables. Because again, if you're trying to get 454 grams of the greens in a day, they're going to take up most of the blender. And then you add what's left in terms of the remaining space would be the fruit. Unless
I can't actually physically fit any more greens in there. Literally, it's almost pretty much rammed. There's just a little bit left at the top with the 200 grams of spinach. So,
well, you might either need a bigger blender or you're not pushing hard enough, because I can get 454 grams into the 5-cup mark on my blender and still plenty of space left. So you got to really be motivated to push it down. But if that was your first meal, and then later on in the day, you were going to get the remaining greens in, maybe through a salad or something else, then it could be. You're also missing the omega-3s. So we want to get in that flax and chia. So there's nothing wrong with that meal. It's better than most people eat an entire day. But if you're trying to hypernourishment, it's a very specific protocol where you have to actually hit certain marks for your vegetables, your omega-3s, and the water intake for it to count. So it could count towards hypernourishment.
So push the greens down, get more greens in there. Add obviously the source of omega-3s, the flax seeds and the chia seeds.
Right.
What about adding in things like cinnamon or sumac? Well, maybe not sumac. Amla, which is some of the highest antioxidant content of any food studied so far.
I haven't seen people need to add anything to it. I feel like people spend so much money on things that don't really give much improvement. So I would say if you find that you use amla and it's made a significant improvement in your health, great, use it. I'm very results oriented. So if that's something that's worked for you, great. This has worked for us. And what our goal is to make things as accessible as possible. We want people to be able to use supermarket foods to get healthy and reverse disease. And this works without having to go to any special store or order something fancy online. We've had people in the US on welfare be able to use our protocol and heal and get healthy. We had a wonderful woman who posted on my social media, Kim, who was in a wheelchair with lupus and so sick and disabled on welfare. And she just followed my free content and she healed, and she's out of her wheelchair. She's flexing her arms, feeling good. And she did it with cheap produce that she could get on her low income. So there's no reason to invest in a lot of different supplements. I don't encourage people to add weird powders and things. I'm not selling that. I really want people to learn how to just use real food. But if you find that amla gives you an extra boost and you can afford to, great. But it's not something I've studied or really think that is necessary. But you can also use seasonings. If you like cinnamon, use cinnamon. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about ginger and, you know, ginger?
Yeah, if you like it, then go for it. But it doesn't count towards the hypernourishment because those are specific ingredients.
Okay, so when you're saying hypernourishment, because these are very antioxidant-rich things, aren't they? And so when you're saying hypernourishment, you're referring to minerals, and you're saying those minerals come from the greens.
Hypernourishment is the name of our protocol of this specific overdose in nutrition to stimulate cellular repair and metabolism. So it's very specific in the amounts, in the types of foods. It doesn't mean other foods aren't helpful, but what we found is these are the most essential to focus on in order to stimulate disease reversal and cellular repair.
Okay. All right. And so I guess people who are going to listen to this are going to be like, okay, if I have this massive smoothie that Dr. Goldner's identified, you know, adapted from Lokesh's idea, what would you say to them if they said, okay, but I want to continue to have some high quality, organic, maybe even raw animal products? Would that be
raw animal products? That's dangerous. I mean,
you know, you get raw cheeses, don't you? And things like that. Or maybe some bodybuilders eat raw eggs, for instance.
Yeah, you're a very serious danger from toxic bacteria and infections. I mean, we're not carnivores. So, you know, carnivores have very short guts where the meat that they eat doesn't stay in their body for very long. So they eat it, it goes straight through a very short gut and right back out again. But herbivores, and we have guts like herbivores, we have very long guts where things move through. And the reason for that is because our guts are designed to break down fibrous plant material, which takes more time and a longer gut to do that. So meat doesn't actually move very well through our guts. It actually rots or putrefies in the gut. It sits there. And so that's why people who eat undercooked meat or raw meat are very much at risk of getting toxic infections. I mean, you could die from some of these infections or have just a terrible case of diarrhea that needs treatment in the hospital because of eating undercooked or raw meat. So it also is evidence towards us not being carnivores, right? Because our correct food shouldn't kill us. It should help us heal, right? So so that's one thing. But aside from the raw meat or egg thing, I would say that you need to make your decision about food based off of how well what you're doing is working for you, the results that you're looking for. So for example, if someone says, you know, I did your protocol 90%, I see that all the time. I did it 90%. I added hypernourishment, but maybe I ate slightly under, or I might've added something else that you don't recommend, and I still reverse my disease. I am so excited for them because truly this level of nutrition that we recommend, this is what we're saying is, if you do this amount, we're going to see results. Now, plenty of people can get away with less, right? Not everyone has to be strict. What we're saying is if you're strict, now we can maximize your results. We can say this is going to give you the results, right? If you're not strict, maybe you'll get lucky, maybe you won't, right? So if somebody's saying I eat some free range meat here and there, and I do hypernourishment and eat tons of plant-based foods and my health is perfect, I will just clap for them. That's wonderful, right? But it doesn't mean that those meats are good for them. It's not. They're directly inflammatory. I mean, animal products, even the free-range stuff, they are a major driver of omega-6 fatty acids or arachidonic acids that create the inflammatory immune system. So for some people, even a little bit of inflammation is going to be dangerous. I mean, if you have kidney problems, that's going to be very dangerous, right? So it really depends on your goals, your current health, and is it working for you? That's the most important thing is it working for you? Because most folks who come to me are sick. And I always tell them, you know, your current state of health is a result of your habits up until now, your habits around your food, your sleep, your stress, your emotional health and self-care. All of those habits have created your current health. And if you want to change your health, we have to change those habits. And some people can change them all at once, like they do in my rapid recovery programs, where like, boom, they're with me every day for 6 weeks, right? Versus one thing at a time, if their health can tolerate them taking longer.
Okay. I've got some questions here from somebody who's a listener who's suffering with lupus. I mean, to be honest, given the answers that you've given, we may have already answered them. But it says it would be good to know what foods are helpful in remission. Although they say they're not in remission at the moment, and if there are any known to trigger. I've been told to avoid garlic, especially raw garlic. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's so interesting that the nutrition mythology that's out there. I mean, I don't think I've ever gone a day in my life without garlic. That's the only. I mean, my family, the only spices they ever used when I was growing up is salt, pepper, and garlic. So no, what I found so the hardest part is getting that remission state, right? Reversing the disease, getting those antibodies down, getting your health back. That's the hard part. Remission is actually pretty easy. So I call that maintenance mode. So I'm in maintenance mode now because it's been 17 years. I've had 0 relapses. I'm in maintenance mode. So what that means to me is I still eat in a way to support optimal health. You know, I'm sitting here with my green smoothie. It's not a prop. This is what I'm having for breakfast. We're eating in the morning, right? This is my morning breakfast. So I still use hypernourishment. I'm a high raw plant-based eater, so mostly smoothies during the day, and then at dinner I have a salad and then something cooked, usually some kind of vegetable soup that's from the pressure cooker. Last night I had quinoa with some beans, but something, you know, that's plant-based. Sometimes I just have salad for dinner. I actually prefer it. I think raw eating feels the most optimal in terms of just vitality and energy. Cooked food's just easy. So that's how I usually eat. When you've been in maintenance for a long time, I usually tell people don't even mess with your body for at least 6 months after this works for you. Let yourself enjoy just being healthy. But usually after people have been healthy for 6 months or more, they can introduce what I call recreational eating here and there. So recreational eating is like recreational drugs. You're doing it to get high and you know it's bad for you, right? So it would be like eating something that had sugar or something that had oil in it, right? So every once in a while I'll do that. I'll have, you know, some processed vegan burger or something, or a vegan baked good. I know it's unhealthy, but my body tolerates it fine. My stomach doesn't like it. And my taste buds feel overwhelmed. So it'll taste good and then it's like, oh gosh, I can't do this. But no arthritis comes back, no rashes come back, my health is fine, and I'm still eating all my healthy foods that day. So if people, you know, and so for life, it actually ends up being pretty manageable. You keep your hypernourishment forever, right? You're going to keep yourself fully armed with the nutrition that you need to keep healthy. You can have other cooked plant-based foods without a problem. Stay away from anything processed or oily or sugary for the most part. And when you've been healthy for 6 months or more, yeah, here and there, you might be able to dabble. What I found is most people who, if somebody relapses, and it does happen where people, especially emotionally, haven't done the work to stick with it, they're treating it like a diet rather than a lifestyle change. When people do relapse, almost entirely it's because of meat and dairy. Every once in a while, they switch over to vegan junk food eating, and you know, you can eat, you know, vegan burgers and French fries and Oreo cookies and get yourself sick again too, especially if you're not fully finished with the healing process. So, you know, my goal is to get people healthy and then transition them into a diet that's less strict, but still healthy for life.
And I mean, the same person's also saying hair growth with lupus. They've lost a lot of hair recently. They're finding skin and scalp problems since out of remission. Anything to aid with that would be very helpful, as it's very sore. Lipical lupus, lesions and rash.
Yeah,
I guess you're going to say that, you know, the protocol will help to
yeah, it's the same protocol. And again, that's because it's not specific for disease, but for cellular repair. It works for all things. I mean, I've had people do the program for alopecia who grew their hair back. And most people, like in my rapid recovery group, it's 6 weeks of everyday work. At the end of it, everybody's saying, my nails are growing like mad. My hair is growing, right? Because they're so nourished that everything starts to go into this rapid repair and growth mode. So their organs are healing, including their skin and their hair and everything else. So your skin is the last organ to receive nutrition and hydration. So you really need to maximize your commitment to the protocol and stick with it long enough to see those results come all the way to the surface.
Okay. Do people who've got hair going gray, does it go black? Just as a very quick aside. It's
interesting. I've had people say that, but it hasn't worked for me. I still have my gray hairs and that hasn't changed. So
I've got to say, I think it works for me back in the day. So I've not been raw for some time, but I think it did.
I mean, I don't have a lot of gray, but I have some around the here, but not a lot compared to for my age. But my family's kind of like that genetically. So, you know, and some people say, what about, you know, male pattern baldness? My husband, it has not suddenly grown all of his hair back. There's certain things that, yeah, I haven't seen that be, but for for inflammatory hair loss, we have seen remarkable results. Again, sometimes people will still have patches because scar tissue is not going to come back to life. But for people who have inflammatory hair growth issues, we have seen regrowth, which has been really good.
Lovely. Dr. Goldner, we've reached the end of the interview. It's been a fascinating conversation. I guess before we leave, I'd just like to ask you, are there any parting comments you'd like to make? Any websites you'd like to lead our audience to?
Absolutely. You know, as someone who spent a lot of my life sick, I think it's important to remember that the changes you need to make are not just for you, but for all the people that love you. You know, the most traumatizing memory I have from when I was really sick with kidney failure was not my own pain, but seeing my grandmother crying on her knees, begging God to take her life and spare mine. That this is something, you know, taking care of yourself is not just about you, but it's about all the people you love, and ultimately about the gifts you were born to give in this world. So when you're contemplating making big changes to your diet, to your lifestyle, remember that, you know, the difficulties in changing your diet, those are early on. You get used to them, and suddenly you won't crave those things you used to crave, right? Those difficulties are short-lived and they're minor compared to the difficulties that you face and the people who love you face with you continuing to be sick. So if it helps you with your motivation, remember that, and do it for the people who love you as well as yourself, and just take any action you can now, even if it's adding a little bit more greens, a little bit more water. Start taking the actions in any way that you can now to start working towards the health that you really want. In terms of following me, I'm prolific on social media. So at Goodbye Lupus, we'll work for Instagram, we'll work from Facebook, on YouTube. If you look up Goodbye Lupus, you'll find me. Although I think it's youtube.com/Dr. Goldner, but Goodbye Lupus will take you everywhere. And I am live every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time just to do free Q&As for the public. I often have my classes online for free for people who want to sit and listen to this for 5 hours and learn all the details. But I'm available in all different ways, and I'm happy to help answer people's questions if they come on live with me on Wednesdays.
Excellent. Thank you so much for making time for us here at Fever Radio in Leeds today, Dr. Goldner. And personally, I'd like to say I hope your message spreads far and wide and hopefully helps as many people as possible. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. It's really been nice to spend the time with you.
Thank you.